Hi, my name is Jackie Werner, and I am the Scholarly Communications and Research Librarian here at PCOM, as well as the Psychology Liaison. And we're presenting this panel discussion as part of our library seminar series / library author series. And that is we have a series of talks. Many of those are going to be given by PCOM affiliates who have written books. We have some past ones on our YouTube channels. We have like one student that wrote a book of poetry, some academic works, and just a really great series. We have a whole bunch of old recordings on the YouTube channel where this will be soon. And I'm going to turn this over to Scott and our panelists now. We'll have a Q&A at the end. Mm-hmm. And if there are any, we'll be monitoring chat to see if there are any questions that want to be asked. Mm-hmm. All right, and I will mute so you will no longer hear that ding when every new person gets in the waiting room. All right, Scott, take it away.
Great, Jackie. Thank you so much. Well, welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you're here with us. I'm Scott Glassman. I'm the director of the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program here at PCOM. And we're thrilled to be here to talk today about cultivating resilience and well-being in children, adolescents, and families. It's an area that I get very excited about, especially considering how there is a youth mental health crisis going on, and that we need to do everything that we can, both from a traditional psychological perspective, but also from a flourishing perspective and a preventive perspective to help kids reach their full potential. I'm currently working with the Philadelphia Union Foundation to bring resilience training to youth soccer athletes. Which is a really exciting project that we've been running for the past 3.5 years now, entering its new phase. So I'm thrilled to hear what our wonderful panelists have to say about a number of different topics that we'll be talking about. And we encourage you, as we go through this evening, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will have, like Jackie said, some time at the end, which will be our Q&A time for the panelists. And yeah, we welcome you to, if you could, just keep your microphones closed so we can have the best listening environment possible. And if you would like to say something during the Q&A, you can certainly open your mic or put it in the chat. So our agenda for this evening, we'll start out with some introductions. We'll go into our discussion questions, and then we'll have time for our Q&A. I wanted to just tell you a little bit first about our online Master of Applied Positive Psychology program here at PCOM. We have many of our students here tonight, and in addition to our wonderful, dedicated, fantastically accomplished faculty in many, many different areas that we study in the program. Positive development, obviously, is what we're focusing on this evening, but we have core learning in emotions, positive emotions, mindfulness, systems, and institutional well-being. We emphasize through our fully online program skill acquisition. So if you're interested in learning about mindfulness and how to conduct mindfulness sessions, motivational interviewing, program evaluation, and group facilitation, you may want to check our program out. We can be a great stepping stone if you're considering doctoral work in psychology. And we're convenient because we're fully online. You really can do this program from anywhere. We're both synchronous and asynchronous. If you like what you're hearing tonight, your panelists are also faculty in the MAP program. So come back for more if you're interested. So we also, just one other thing I'll mention is we focus from a positive psychology perspective on the intersection of positive psychology with clinical health psychology. So the mind-body-spirit connection and evidence that supports the biopsychosocial basis of wellness is something that we talk a lot about in our program across the lifespan and cross-culturally. So we have a QR code here on the screen. Feel free to snap that, and that will take you to our MAP website so you can learn more about us. And that brings us to the main event, why you're all here with us tonight. So we have our wonderful panelists. I'm just going to turn it over to first to Marisa, Dr. MacDonnell, and allow her to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what your background is in this area and why it interests you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I see some current and former students here, so nice to see you all again as well. Like Scott said, I am a faculty member here. I work in both the research methods course, and I've also taught the capstone course, which I'll be teaching again this year. And my relationship to both positive and applied psychology, I think, comes in a few ways. My doctoral study and my postdoc were both around social emotional learning and character development with adolescents. So there was a lot of applied research and evaluation work that I did during that time, both with schools and out of school time programs. But I really also very much appreciated the positive psychology approach and other work that I've done with refugees, incarcerated individuals, other school intervention work that I've done, families. It's really been the thing that's been sort of the through line throughout all of my work, and the thing that's really connected both my study of social emotional learning to character development and purpose. It's really been the consistent through line. And I can say that as, I hope you all like what you hear tonight, but also just as a instructor in this program, I have gotten so much out of working within this program, and there has been such a great community within it. And there's elements of the program that I've heard that I wish I got training in myself, not to be giving a plug. So I feel bad if it seems like I'm giving a plug, but just even the biopsychosocial elements, motivational interviewing, things that I've heard from the students in the program that I wish I'd gotten myself in my doctoral study. That I think are really great. But outside of here, I am an applied researcher. I work at Montclair State University for my full-time gig. I work primarily on a statewide early childhood initiative in the state of New Jersey at a center called the Center for Research and Evaluation on Education and Human Services. So that is really where my alignment comes into the research methods element of things and the capstone, because applied research is sort of my day-to-day. So nice to see you all. I can't wait to learn more about you all and answer your questions.
Thank you, Marisa. And let's go to Dr. Duranso. Chris Duranso is with us. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I teach the Positive Developmental course and in the MAP program. I also teach full-time as faculty at the University of Rhode Island here in Rhode Island. And my Ph.D. is in positive developmental psychology. So I studied in Claremont, California under Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He was my advisor and my mentor. My area of focus then and now is really with emerging adults and adolescents, and how leisure time activities, physical movement, in particular flow, contribute to well-being. So now I'm focusing really on teaching, but I'm also really looking forward to getting back to some research in the near future. But for now, I'm really excited to teach the positive development course, and also I teach positive psychology and development here at the University of Rhode Island. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Chris. And let's go to Lisa, Dr. Johnson.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all today and meet you all over Zoom. I'm Dr. Johnson. I'm one of the teachers of the Positive Psychology Approaches Across the Lifespan course with PCOM. My background is in developmental psychology and psychobiology, which means I study how people grow and develop both physically and mentally over time, and looking at different social and environmental factors that impact this biopsychosocial development. A lot of my research has focused on understanding how different experiences during childhood and adolescence impacts our well-being across the rest of your life. I'm particularly fascinated by the effects of stress and adversity on the body and brain, and how this can shape our overall mental health and development. long term. I've spent a lot of time focusing on how things like poverty and environmental factors, such as exposure to pollution, can affect stress responses in young people, and how economic hardship and family income during adolescence and childhood and adolescence can predict how the body responds to stressful situations later in life. My dissertation focused on positive youth development and how cultural factors contribute to well-being. This research really shone a light on how significant ethnic pride and cultural values are for positive development, particularly for Mexican American youth, which was the sample I studied for this work. And the MAP program really resonates with me because it emphasizes using research and theory to make a real world difference in people's lives. And this is something I really want to incorporate into my career going forward. More applied work. I didn't get the opportunity to do applied research in my graduate training. I did some applied work with my postdoc, which was in a social neuroscience lab developing a mindfulness-based intervention deployed through phones and within partner pairings, so connecting two people together online and walking them through a mindfulness-based practice. And that was implemented in school settings. But I'm very interested to see different practical settings and different ways to apply all of the knowledge that I've learned and all of the expertise in positive psychology in a more practical way to support how people thrive. And that's me. I'm really looking forward to answering your questions and hearing about what you're interested in. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. And the first question, let's jump right in. I'm going to stop the share so we can see each other a little bit more clearly. What have you learned in your work or your research that's really important to focus on when we're developing flourishing interventions for children, adolescents, and or families? Is there some like one or two components, and it may vary obviously, but what really stands out to you as something that's critical? And anybody can kind of jump in on this.
I'm happy to jump in. Just with the first thing that comes to mind with me is I think it really has to be defined by the sort of individual or context of interest. I think trying to sometimes, there's all sorts of ways that flourishing is defined and all sorts of ways that different values and virtues are defined. And I think that when you try to sort of map that on to the work that you're doing with a particular person or a particular group, that can be hard. I think it has to be really defined by them and has to be, driven by them to a certain extent. Like you can then help with the tools and what that would look like to grow those areas. But I think it has to be determined what it is that they want to flourish in.
Yeah, thank you. Chris, Lisa?
Yeah, as a developmental psychologist, the thing that came to my mind right away is it's not one thing. It can never be just one thing. In development, we often discuss the individual differences that we see in human beings, and even within a family, we see individual differences amongst family members. So the reality really means that there's no one solution that applies to each individual or each family even. Family is an evolving ecosystem, right? So we can take some broad understandings and use them to guide families or educators or mentors to help create a unique system of interventions that can contribute to thriving. In my work, what I've seen is that there is this balance between physical movement, between purposeful exploration and leisure time, mindset, an avoidant or approach motivation, and all of these things together can contribute to flourishing. But even within each of those pieces, what physical movement looks like is different for every human being, or what purposeful exploration or leisure time looks like to each person is different, right? So it would be important to really keep in mind when we're developing these interventions that we can have broad theories and ideas, but then we need to build in the flexibility for that individual difference.
I really resonate with everything that Chris and Marisa have already shared. And I just want to add that one of the biggest things that I think sometimes gets overlooked when designing these interventions is not taking like a systems level approach, recognizing the interplay between individual and systemic factors within the community and the economy and different societal level systems that are at play. All of these are working together to influence well-being, and designing interventions at different levels that are all in parallel or complementary can be really impactful, and I think would increase the efficacy of the programs that we're designing.
There's been a lot of talk about and work around strengths, right? That's a core part of positive psychology, strengths-based identification in young people. And do you have any ideas about the way strengths, character strengths, can be addressed through SEL programs in schools or within families or within adolescents? There's a way that we do it in our Happier You program in MAP, showing strengths and then having our adolescents pick out a couple strengths that represent their best qualities and talking about them with peers as a way of connecting that to something that's meaningful, but also is reinforced. I'm wondering if any of you have had some experience working from a strengths-based perspective, and what would that look like within an intervention, like from your perspective?
You go ahead. You start, Chris.
Thank you. So I have personal experience with this, very recent, that I'd love to share. So in one of my college courses that I taught this past semester, I was working with college freshmen, and they were all first-generation college students. One of the challenges that we often hear from college students and adolescents is that they're really struggling to figure out what they want to do with their lives, right? That sense of purpose and direction can be really tricky to identify. We live in a culture where there are so many options, which is great, for career paths, but it can also be very overwhelming. And so with this class that I had this past semester, what I decided to do was use the character strengths assessment, and then have students take that assessment, and then from the results in that assessment, determine some career options that would fit nicely with their highest strengths. And to me, that just kind of made sense, right? It didn't seem to be this, great aha moment for me to have students do that, but they were so excited to have some structure, to have some specific results, empirically based results, to really help them think about how they can use their strengths in the pursuit of their sense of purpose.
Oh, wonderful. Marisa.
So the sort of the example that I had was kind of similar to what Chris was describing, but with some younger people that I had worked on some evaluation work of years ago. When I first came into my doctoral program, we were evaluating a character development program that was being used in Scottish schools, and this program was funded by the Templeton Foundation, and our research was also funded by the Templeton Foundation, which is very interested in the development of human flourishing. But this program, what they actually did, it was a poster program where kids they got this template to complete it within their schools. And within that, they were given like a pool of different character virtues within there that they had to select and talk about how they exemplified them or how they represented them, and really identifying their character strengths. And it sort of reminded me of what you were talking about, Chris, because I don't know how much, even myself, I'm almost 40. I don't know how much when I was an adolescent or when I was in my 20s that I was thinking, what am I good at? What are my character strengths, and how that would have guided my career and decision making. I don't think I did a lot of that reflection. So this poster program has them sort of identifying, and this is 12, 13-year-olds, like their different character strengths within a pool. But then it also had this other element that I thought was sort of cool. And it had three parts. So the first element was sort of identifying your character strengths and being able to, you know, talk about examples of how you exhibit that. Then the other thing was picking a sort of moral exemplar and sort of mapping some character strengths onto that. So like, how do these moral exemplars sort of show or live these virtues in life? And then the final part of it was taking sort of that, like, their identified strengths, their moral exemplar, and sort of putting that into future aspirations. And I just thought, I mean, obviously doing all those things at once could be a lot, right? And this had a very sort of like nice, tidy poster template, and like, maybe we don't want to be that cookie cutter either. But I thought that there were different elements of that really had some important strategies within them that you could use. You don't have to use them all together, but you could do any one of those things and it could be sort of valuable in thinking about taking a strengths-based approach and, working sort of values or virtues within that. I liked that.
One thing, oh, sorry, Scott, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say I can see how that can increase motivation and hope and a sense of enthusiasm for looking forward, which can be challenged for many emerging adults and adolescents when you have, oh, these are my values and this is how I see my values enacted in the future in some way, whether it's through career, Chris, from what you were saying, or Marissa, if it's in some other way, maybe it's a passion of theirs that they're just discovering. Lisa, yeah, what do you want to add?
One thing I wanted to add is that strengths-based programming, I've seen so many, maybe not so many, but like more and more digital apps and tech companies that are designing different platforms to support this education. And one thing that I've shared with my class in the early childhood week was this one called Legends Lab, which is something like what Marissa was saying about providing children with exemplars of different people, like different role models to look up to, like influencers, like major sports players. It's like they market it as like a emotional or like mental fitness program. And they have like 5-minute exercises that children can do with their parents to sort of teach children or help children learn to be more confident in themselves. And I think that incorporating something like that in the home is really important, and it could be more effective if it's mirrored in schools as well. And I know there's a lot of social emotional learning programs already doing this, but having more of like the same lessons being taught at home and school and community, I think that could be really impactful. And I think technology in general has like an untapped potential to be designing supportive systems to help children learn about their different strengths, help them discover themselves really, because I find that that's like a main gap in some of this education, especially in high school, when kids or teenagers are designing their life, basically thinking about what they want to do with their life and everything. Pausing for like a self-discovery phase, I think, is a main or could be a really strong point in adding into educational systems. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
And while we're talking about technology and the impact of technology on thriving and flourishing, or potentially the opposite side of it, there's been, obviously everybody knows that TikTok may be banned in the United States. So I'm wondering if anybody has some ideas about social media use and what's the connection, because it has two sides to it, right? So it can be adaptive in some ways for kids and connecting them with a social network. And at the same time, it can be counterproductive with some kind of more passive, isolative, depression-oriented elements to it. So any thoughts on, where we should go from a technology perspective even further?
Oh, it's such a huge question. I think there's a lot that positive psychologists can do to increase digital literacy about what children and teenagers are signing up for when they're joining these apps, having more clear language in the data privacy and the informed consent procedures for downloading and creating profiles. And then, yeah, incorporating it into like general education should be a component of the approach, because almost every kid or teenager that I know has these accounts and has these profiles, but haven't been thinking about like what this data is doing and where it's going. So I think that's one side of it. And then on the other side, I think social media does have a big potential to increase connectedness between people, help people find support when they are in like socially isolated places where they can't get access to the right support systems. I think those are a blessing and a positive of it. It just needs to be designed in like a safe structure, especially for young kids and teenagers.
Yeah, I think like with so many things that we talk about, activities that we talk about, it's really about moderation, right? Video games, great. They have benefits actually in moderation, right? Social media can have an incredibly positive influence, or digital environments can have an incredibly positive contribution to make to identity and connection and community. But it also has to be as part of a larger toolbox, right? Through activities and connections that we can make, or that kids can make.
Yeah, Marisa, do you have a couple thoughts on this?
Yeah, so currently I sort of agree that I feel like with adolescents and older, I do think there's a lot of opportunity there, even though there is, some of the risks that you spoke to around like isolation and all that. But currently, more of my work revolves around younger children and early childhood. And I have conflicted feelings about that, right? Because I think that I think a lot of the guidance is to really reduce, if not with very, very young children, eliminate the use of screens and technology. And certainly I can see the benefits of that. I mean, there's all sorts of research that comes out that is talking about the benefits of like nature-based schools and the more time that kids are spending outside and how that really benefits their development. I and personally, for my own kids, I very much see that. But there's this other reality, is that they're being exposed to it. And you can't really, I mean, you can try your best to try to keep your kids away from screens or from technology. But once they go into schools and to daycare, talk to other kids at the playground, like it's there. And so then I think it becomes like, well, you know, what is appropriate for very young children? What is a safe amount? Because I think that the guidance has historically been, the past few years, is that, up until age 2 or 3, kids are supposed to basically have no exposure to screens, but like we know that that's happening. And so at what point do we really reconcile the reality of what is happening with what the guidance is? And as part of my work, we actually send a lot of observers out into classrooms to look at classroom environments. And one of the things that we often look at is the use of technology in the classroom with very young children. And we have different skills that we use for infant and toddlers versus like preschool age kids. And there are certain things that we look for about like having good use of technology, like using technology for like a movement break or to all do something sort of coordinated together for older kids can be really beneficial. But handing a 2-year-old an iPad in a classroom that they really have no ability to stop using can be a little bit more problematic. So, I think there is guidance there, but I think with really young children is where I struggle. I don't have the answers there. I just have a lot of questions myself.
Yeah, as we move on to think about how, like, what are some of the other obstacles that we can think of to flourishing for youth and families today? What are a couple of the prime obstacles? Technology might be one, and regulating technology and finding a way to find that middle ground, the happy medium for technology use. But what other obstacles do you see to flourishing? And then I guess let's follow up to that question. What ideas, where can we begin with those obstacles? And maybe that has to do with systemic or vulnerabilities that relate to marginalized communities, underserved communities. Any thoughts about that?
So many. As I was preparing for this, I wrote down like a list and it was getting way too long. So I think for me, I narrowed it down to structural inequities in the systems at play, poverty, discrimination, just general lack of access to quality education or healthcare are a major challenge for underserved or marginalized groups. And then on another hand, it's like mental health stigma that prevents people from getting the care that they need or receiving the support or even talking about whatever problem that they're facing or challenge that they're going through. And then on a more like targeted scale, like a cultural misalignment between the interventions and the populations that they're designed to serve. I think a lot of approaches and interventions have failed to address the unique lived experiences of these communities, which just generally leads to less engagement and having the program be less effective. So yeah, lack of access, stigma, and a misalignment. I think those are the ones I highlighted as top. And addressing them, oh, that's a whole other question. Come back to me.
Yeah, I think similar to you, Lisa, as I was thinking about this question, I only came up with more questions. So my thoughts on it were, I think some of the major challenges right now are hope and optimism, right? We see so many challenges in our geopolitical environment, in our climate, and I think that those are providing, they're stealing hopeful futures. So much that, it's a very different environment than it was 5 or 10 years ago in terms of our ability to tap into hope and optimism. So to me, I think we need to find ways that we can use PPIs and PAIs to embed those in institutions where children from underserved and marginalized groups, where we know that they're embedded. So that would be schools primarily, where we can help them defend themselves against the stresses of marginalization, to tap into what we know works to build hope and resilience and optimism. And so, for instance, teaching them what hope is, and then engaging in activities specifically that help them understand agency and pathways. And part of that, not just with children, but with institutions and with families and with communities, we can talk about how action, social action, and pro-social behaviors can help us develop hope and optimism, right? There's nothing better really than getting active, like doing something when you're feeling a sense of a lack of hope or a lack of optimism, right? So I guess I do have some ideas.
Marissa, looks like you wanted to jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of everything I was hearing from Lisa and Chris, I think sort of resonates with sort of where my mind was going with this, like my gut reactions, which were around things like SEL, or those types of in-school interventions or programs that are coming in, those being a little bit seen as like a luxury. So not necessarily being accessible to all groups. And that being one barrier, right? So that it's like seen as a luxury, not sort of like an essential part of their learning and development. And it just being sort of like enmeshed or integrated into sort of like whole school approaches. So that's one thing. But then there's this other side of it, which I think has probably happened more and more over the past 5 years, is SEL, or things like it. And when I say SEL, I could mean like character development, those types of like, positive youth development interventions. I think it's happening more so with SEL though, is that it's been a little like sanitized, and people have gotten sort of fearful of some work like this, especially if it is connected to like recent or, political events. People can be a little sensitive around that. And I do think that there are some solutions around that. I think people tend, in those arenas where people are maybe more fearful of the phrase social emotional learning, words like character development tend to be a little bit more appealing and resonate with different audiences a little bit better, which is one of the things I love about social emotional and character development, is that it's really, you know, one is two sides of the same coin. So I do think that there are opportunities there, but I do think it's like kind of this weird thing where it's either seen as a luxury or not essential or not a part that's necessary and it's not there, or it's like feared in some way. And it's either really been like, you know, ripped down to the bare bones, or no longer wanted because it's seen as a risk in certain arenas.
And it makes me think of some schools that are incorporating more mindfulness into the curriculum, and the removal simultaneously, coming back to technology, of cell phones, right? So kids can begin to focus a little bit more effectively in class and appreciate the present moment. I'm wondering if we could turn our discussion a little bit to mindfulness, because it is such an important part of positive psychology, and it's been so commonly researched and supported in terms of its efficacy on well-being, life satisfaction, and a whole number of other psychosocial outcomes. Any thoughts about how we create more mindful children, adolescents, and families? Is there something that we're not doing, something that we can offer?
Well, Scott, actually, if you could talk a little bit more about the workshops that you're doing with Legos, I feel like that's an answer. Incorporate like teaching mindfulness
Yeah.
through play-like activities, I think is one way that it would be easily adopted by families for young children. And then it's a skill that is learned young that stays throughout the lifespan.
Absolutely. So through play, I'm very interested, especially in Lego, which has very pro-social kind of roots in how it can be used. It can be a solitary activity, but it also can be a communal activity, an opportunity to problem solve together, to build relationships, as well as to appreciate the individual components, and using mindfulness through all of the senses as somebody's building. That can be really, I could see that as a powerful potential intervention for classrooms, especially for early childhood education. So something still I'm thinking about and want to pilot. So that's to be continued, but through play, yeah, absolutely, it's one of the pathways. Chris, you talk a lot about movement, which in and of itself brings somebody into the present moment, and I know you have a lot of experience looking at flow states. Is there a connection between flow, mindfulness, and flourishing that you'd want to talk a little bit more about?
Oh, yeah. So, they do work hand in hand, right? A person who is more mindful is probably has a better time accessing flow. And we know that regular flow activities can cultivate an environment that allows us to be more mindful. So they are strongly connected. Repetitive activity. We know that repetitive activity of all sorts can help us engage in flow. And for me and for my research, I tend to focus on physical movement. So walking, running, hiking are the things that I find to be personally and empirically interesting, right? And so I kind of lost my train of thought there for yes.
And there's research to support that just walking in nature, for instance, just for like 20 minutes, as little as maybe even 15 minutes, can improve our mood. And so I'm wondering, like, kind of nature connectedness, but then again, you have the restraint of not everybody has access to natural environments, and especially with what's happening in our environment these days. So kind of there's the other side of that. But certainly, are there opportunities with movement in smaller ways, or movement built into the educational system? I don't know if that cued any further thoughts about it, Chris.
Yeah. So yeah, it can be a challenge for depending on where you live, what your climate is like and what your safety is like, right? So I talk about this a lot with my students, my college students, about just doing simple things like park in the lot farthest away from your classes so that you can have that mindful walk, appreciating, what you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're walking through as you're making your way to class, instead of thinking of it as, a frustration that you had to park so far away, right? Just enjoy that walk and enjoy the time in nature, to really center yourself before you start your classes for the day. We know that there's, an abundance of research that talks about how mindfulness and flow, and especially when you can tap into those in nature settings, that it changes our neural pathways, right? That it changes our ability to focus, to pay attention. It elevates our creativity and our memory. And of course, all of those are essential for flourishing, for adolescents, for children, for college students, as they're spending so much time in school learning and, exploring their identity and purpose. Being able to tap into, an ability to remember, to think clearly, and to focus their attention and to be creative are essential.
Yeah, absolutely. Marisa, do you have some thoughts to build on that, or any of those
Yeah.
areas?
So I'm probably not as well versed in this area, but I do think, in particular, when thinking about like very young children and the sort of some of the, I don't want to call them threats that we were talking about, but sort of the issues related to technology. Obviously, like being out in nature is sort of the other side of that. But again, even access to nature is like a bit of a luxury. But when you talk about I think for young children in particular, the daycare and school environment can be very overstimulating, right? Like it's long days, there's with a lot of other kids, there's toys, there's all sorts of transitions from one thing to the next. And I do think that when they're outdoors, you're removing a lot of that stimuli. And although like, a young person might not be able to, like very, very young person might have a hard time identifying what mindfulness is or being present in that moment, it very much is the environment that you're giving them at that time. When you're removed, even if it's out on a playground, which is a little bit more chaotic than maybe being out in the woods or taking a hike or something, you're still removing a lot of the extra stimuli that I think is in the normal day-to-day environment and has a lot of benefits for young children. There's just, more and more research keeps coming out to support this, but I think it's because we are seeing so much more of the use of screens just across the board. And that gets very, like I said, gets very tricky with young kids.
Yeah, and it seems like you're talking also about parents being aware of practicing mindfulness themselves, right? And so any thoughts about positive parenting? And maybe this will be our last question before we open it up to our gathered audience here. Any ideas about what we can pull from the research to inform positive parenting that maybe, we're not thinking of right now?
Well, the top thing that pops into my mind, and anybody else can jump in on this as well, but is the idea of serve and return interactions between a parent and a child. And there is a lot of research that shows that this parental sensitivity to the child's distress cues, or reaching behavior to be picked up, yelling to be comforted. There's a lot of cues that the infant or the child is giving out, trying to seek support and security from their parent, and increasing parents' sensitivity and attunement to those cues has been shown to be very effective for promoting stable attachment in young childhood. And that can be done through a variety of different ways. That's the top one, I think, is just increasing the sensitivity and the reliability of the parents' supportive responses, so that the child is learning more and more that they can trust that their parent is a stable base, and they can trust that, and then that effect sort of trickles down into the rest of their social relationships over time. It's really an impactful place to start, I think.
Yeah, you're sort of just reminding me, Lisa, of just how in general, when I earlier on in my career, I did a lot of positive youth development work, more with adolescents, and I would have peers in my program who were doing work with very early childhood populations, and they would mention to me like infant mental health. I was like, what is that? Because that sounds so the opposite of like positive youth development or like positive psychology. It sounded like maybe something was wrong, just like the terminology of it sounded like maybe there was something wrong. And but it took me a while because that wasn't my area of focus. But I very much realize it now that like, as to your point, early childhood, especially when we're talking about parenting and we're talking about like positive psychological approaches, it's so relational. It's all like early relational health. And when they say infant mental health, they're really talking about early relational health because, you know, there is a lot that infant and toddlers but there's also a lot they are not quite able to do. And so much of that is dependent on like the relationship with the adults in their life, and very much doing to what Lisa's speaking to. And when I send, observers out into classrooms, so much of what they're looking for is, to a certain extent, that serve and return interaction between caregivers and the kids in the classroom. Like, how long is a child left crying if they need something? If they're making a lot of noise, how many minutes is it until someone reacts to it and jumps in to intervene in some way? And so it just triggered my memory with that. It's just like, I remember being very confused about that terminology in mental health. I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, what's wrong with their mental health? And so like, there's nothing wrong with their mental health. It's really like promoting their positive relational health with their caregivers.
Yeah, and to serve and return, if we extrapolate into adolescence, do those micro moments of those micro sensitivities, the moments of an adolescent's distress, which is probably hidden more and it's harder to identify, but still really critical for parents to respond in empathic ways, in ways that don't exacerbate the problem. Any thoughts about how this would extrapolate the serve and return idea? Maybe it has been studied, but I'm not familiar with that research.
Well, I think it can be extrapolated into adulthood. I mean, it's 100% or adolescence, it's 100% linked with the secure relationships that are built in the first years of life. And I think what parents sometimes struggle with is teenagers, one of their core challenges is learning how to differentiate themselves from their family, and building like a unique sense of self that's authentic and fulfilling. And a lot of times they have to go outside of the family unit in order to explore and take like turns trying on different types of identities to develop their own sense of it. And so I think one of the things that parents struggle with is finding the correct or appropriate balance between allowing their child or their teenager space to develop and to take healthy risks and to try out new things, but also providing like the supportive structure and consequences if things go too far. So it's you're releasing the leash a little bit, but not all the way, since the teenager really does need support as they're going through this like very vulnerable time, figuring out who they are.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I'm reminded of this phrase that I heard from a college administrator a while back, and that is that children are not bonsai trees to be pruned and shaped, but more like wildflowers to be watered and nurtured in order to watch them grow into the beautiful wild flowers that they are, in their own unique ways. And I think that's just such a great symbol of how I see parenting in the adolescent years. It is such a time where adolescents are pulling away from the family. They are exploring who they are outside of the family unit. And when we allow them that opportunity to flex and to grow and to be that wildflower, not what we prescribe them to be, but what they have decided that they think they are or who they are, that can be a really beautiful thing. I think, though, coupled with that, allowing adolescents to have that freedom, as you mentioned, Lisa, to explore who they are, to, try new things. We also need to cultivate a culture within the family that recognizes that, you have this secure base, that you are loved unconditionally, and that this is a place for you to return to after you've gone off to explore. And when things go right or they don't, you're always safe here in the security of your family. That failure is a necessary part of that exploration, and that's okay, right?
What an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. We'd love to open it up to anyone here who has a question. Please either raise your hand or put the question in the chat, and and if you have a specific question for one of our panelists, you can direct it toward them. Yes, Dina. Nice to see you, Dina.
Hi, nice to see everybody. It's actually great to see you, Scott and Marissa and Chris. And this has been a wonderful panel so far. I did have a question for Dr. Johnson because she brought up the idea of parents having more sensitivity to younger children and babies, like in order to pick up on their cues. And I'm just wondering, for parents who perhaps were not raised themselves in that type of environment and do not know exactly how to respond, like what are some appropriate interventions for those type of parents to become more sensitive to their children?
Great question, Dina. Well, I'm not an expert on this specific type of intervention, but from what I understand, it's more of like a skills training, and also like an attention-focused training to differentiate like the children's cues from distractions, allowing or promoting the parent or empowering the parent to take action when it is appropriate and when they can do so in a safe and sensitive manner. And it seems like there are a lot of research centers and companies out there that are putting out simple worksheets and webinars or online trainings for this sort of thing. I just saw on positivepsychology.com, there's a whole section on positive parenting that comes with worksheets for different age ranges to support parents in more gentle parenting, or whatever you want to call it, that has become more and more popular these days. And then also interventions that maybe address some sort of individual level issues that are coming up in parents' own mindset about parenting, helping them to unlearn whatever patterns that they picked up from their own parents, to release shame or negative emotions that are stored up from those experiences. So it seems like a combined approach of like personal therapy to become a responsible parent, and then also just general education about early childhood development, and this more targeted sensitivity, maybe mindfulness-based programs as well. Sorry, that was kind of garbled at the end. I kind of lost my train of thought.
No, that was actually great. And you covered so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, and we had a question in the chat about how do we help parents? This is from Anna. How can we help parents who might feel overwhelmed and then they give their kids the screen? And then they're burning out, the parents are burning out quickly from work and stress and parenting and other things. And so they're using that technology as a kind of a placeholder. Any thoughts on, how we help with that?
I think, one of the first things that comes to my mind is the importance of having prenatal classes for not only prenatal care and delivery and labor, but also early parenting skills. I think prenatal classes are also really essential in cultivating a community of other early or new parents so that you have a community to tap into. We know that it takes a village to raise children. And if you don't have that village in place already, through family or friends, having those courses during pregnancy can be a really important opportunity to find community, to create community, so that when you have those moments where you're experiencing burnout, I mean, first, it would be great if we could prevent burnout, right? By having that community of people where you can say, hey, let's get together for play dates, or, maybe older individuals who can come over to give you some time to rest, things like that, so that we can prevent those types of burnout circumstances. But if they arise, then having this community that you can tap into and say, whew, I just need somebody to come over and give me a break. Can I drop my baby off for some essential playtime elsewhere?
Thank you. Marissa, yeah, what are your thoughts?
So I think all of this is great. And I think that there is, like, to Chris's point, I think there's things like home visiting programs and parenting programs that can help just have a better awareness of it. I do think it still happens, but I think the extent to which people can plan also to, like, utilize resources is helpful. But what I was really thinking is actually something not necessarily, I mean, I guess it's related to positive psychology, but it was something that they was mentioned to us by an administrator at my son's school. My older child is in kindergarten. And I as a parent hadn't thought about this way, but as a parent, we take on this burden for our children not to be bored. Like, it is like there's so many things you're responsible for as a parent, but you are not responsible for making sure that they're never bored. And once you remove that, and like that does kind of relate to a lot of positive psychology principles, because there's an element of like being in the present, right? Finding interest in the things that are around you, whether that be in your house or outside or wherever you are. But I think that there are often these sort of these barriers that we place on ourselves, right, as parents. And I'm saying this as a parent, not as a faculty member here, but I'm saying that we often have these things as parents that we put on ourselves, like this innate need to make sure that people feel happy and content, and that they have something to do. And it's like, well, there may be a little bit of discomfort at first if you don't immediately turn on the TV when they're bored or when they want something to do, but like they probably will find something else. And I think it's building those tiny habits too, which is another element, which is very much a positive psychology principle as well, is like this taking these little tiny habits of like, well, maybe each time I walk in, and I can just think of this because this is an example of something I do in my house. We live up on the 4th floor apartment. When we get into our apartment, I used to always turn on the TV for my 3 and 6-year-old so I could like get settled and get things put away. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. Like, every time I walk in, I'm no longer turning on the TV. That is not what we're going to do when we walk in. They'll have to wash their hands and find something to do themselves. And like over time, they did do it, but it was a very small habit. I didn't say, we're not doing screens, we're done with TV. I just stopped doing it. I just stopped that one thing. And I do think those two things together, the tiny habits, along with not feeling the pressure to be their entertainers all the time, might be controversial, but
Yeah, it sounds like really a wonderful approach. And we're just about at 8 o'clock, and I know there are a couple other questions in the chat. So if you do need to leave, we just want to thank you for being here. We're going to go a little bit over time, if you don't mind, for those of you who want to stay. Marissa, Chris, Lisa, are you okay with staying another couple minutes so we can get to those other questions? Awesome. So one is, how do you communicate with children who are in high school about their future career paths? I think we were talking about this earlier, in terms of that kind of matching values on with potential careers. Are there any, and then the question is, how do you communicate with children about, like, if they're your children, right, about that? So Chris, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I think you were talking about that earlier. And yeah.
Sure. Yes. A couple of things. One is when I'm talking to college students, freshmen in particular, about career options, what I hear a lot is, they're pressured from their family to make decisions, to find clarity, commit to something. sooner rather than later. And I try to really kind of help them focus on the fact that college in particular is also about exploration, right? That it's not necessarily about committing right away. It's about spending some time exploring courses that sound interesting. Read the course description. Does that sound like a really cool class? If it sounds really cool, then I think that's something that you should take. And over the course of a semester or 2 semesters, or maybe the first 2 years of really freeing yourself up to explore, you will find patterns. What is it that resonates with you? What are the patterns that you can see in the courses you've chosen and the things that excite you or the activities you participated in? And then that can be really illuminating in terms of your career decisions moving forward. And we know from research and statistics from college level that students who commit early to a career path or to a degree are much more likely to change their major multiple times when compared to students who spend the first 2 years of college just exploring and then committing to a major at the end of their second year. So I encourage students to think about that, right? To really think about what is their interest as opposed to what is your major or what is your career. That will all kind of come together.
Yeah, so like the removal of the pressure, it's almost like that wildflower philosophy coming back again. Are there any strategies for teaching teens who struggle with oppositional defiant behaviors and how to be resilient and thrive? So can we think of any, if we have a particular challenge with adolescents who may be asserting autonomy in maybe an unhealthy or damaging way?
I think maybe addressing like the root cause of whatever oppositional behavior is being displayed, kind of exploring like the reasons behind it, validating like whatever distress or negative emotions that are causing this sort of disruptive behavior. Those are valid emotions to have, and yet you are responsible for the way that your behavior impacts other people. So teaching or providing some more lessons around emotional validation and behavioral modification would be like an umbrella approach. Targeted strategies, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and I think thank you, Lisa. And we have one last question for this evening for you, Dr. Johnson. This is from Monica. She's an undergrad who's interested in working with Latinx and adolescents, families, and communities. And you mentioned that you work with this population. She's curious, how can families and communities promote or cultivate cultural values to foster the social emotional well-being of Latinx adolescents?
Oh, great question, Monica. Yeah, this was one of the topics of my dissertation. We were focusing on the cultural values, ethnic pride, feminismo, and respeto that are traditional in Latinx or Mexican American cultures. Strategies for promoting them, creating a supportive environment where children feel safe to engage in their traditional cultural background activities and express their views, promoting generally like positive socialization practices within families to sort of support the process of internalizing those values or those traditions within your sense of self and identity in a positive way. And finding appropriate mentors and role models within one's community to guide that internalization process in a positive manner and start building a sense of pride around your background and the traditions of your family. And then the last thing I'll say is recognizing the strengths that are inherent in your community and shifting more towards this strengths-based perspective, that there are strengths inherent in every human, there's strengths inherent in every ethnic or racial, cultural community, recognizing that and sort of continuing that message in communities, in schools, in families, across the different levels of the system. Those are the things I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm happy to talk about this further. I don't know if we're providing our emails.
If you'd like to, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. And while you're doing that, I just want to mention Eric's contribution. Eric says that the American Academy of Pediatrics now promotes the use of strengths-based questioning when talking to teens during health visits. It sounds fantastic. They really promote starting discussions by asking what they believe their own strengths are, which is something that we had discussed and something we use in our Happier You program. So the website is there. Eric's provided that website if you're interested in that. And please join me in thanking the wonderful conversation that we've had for Marisa, Chris, Lisa, your knowledge, your expertise, your instincts about what we can do with the field of positive psychology in nurturing positive development have been invaluable. So wonderful hearing your thoughts and sharing those with our community here. So thank you. I hope we can have more conversations about this and that this is just the beginning. But I'm really grateful for all of you. And for those of you who have joined us tonight, thank you for spending your Monday evening with us. We know how valuable your time is. So thank you. And we hope to see you again soon.